Hello, everyone. This has been Dunn, your AP Sensei, your creator of such comics as Ninja High School, Warrior Nun, Tomorrow Girl, which is on Indiegogo right now, Volume 4, Flight to the Future. Please check it out. Link will be below. Also, I am the founder of Anarchic Press, a comic book publisher established in 1985, celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. So, we just recently had our AP birthday bash, as a thank you to our readers and supporters and creators from the past, present, and the future. And we want to thank everyone who attended. It was a great, great celebration of Anarch Press these past 40 years. Now, things are really in turmoil right now in the comic book industry. But we, as a company, persisted, to remain relevant and to survive the coming, turmoil that is around the corner. Well, with all the diamond stuff going on and the direct market, as it is, and the tariffs and stuff like that, people are wondering whether or not the comic book industry will succeed or we survive even, let alone succeed. And it got me thinking. My brother and I, he is my brother who's the financial aspect of the company and probably the most important reason why AP has survived so long. But also, it is important though that we also credit all the creators who have kept loyal to Antarctic Press and kept it afloat all these many years. Now, people have come up to me and are surprised that we have survived these past 40 years. I mean, 40 years is a long time by any stretch of the imagination. When I started at Antarctic Press, I was 21, and now I'm becoming 61. It's a long time. A long time has passed. And a lot of people have come up to me and asked, how did I manage to keep AP afloat? Well, we've had our ups and downs for sure, but probably the single probably most important thing is that any comic book publisher has to contend with is product. You have to get your product out there, and you have to continually make product. Now, there's a reason why Marvel and DC have survived this long. They keep putting out product. Even small companies back in the day survived a long time simply because they just kept churning out product. The only time that they fail is when their product does not sell. And it's just like any business. When your losses exceed your, when your expenditures exceed your revenue, then you're going to go out of business. Simple as that. There's no other formula. It's just like losing weight. If you burn more calories than you take in, you're going to lose weight. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter what you do. If you can burn more calories than you intake, then you're going to lose weight. I always have this debate with people about that. But, hey, simple formula. Very, very simple formula. Same with any business. When your revenue exceeds your losses, then you make a profit. And that allows you to remain relevant. Now, how do you make a profit? You have to come out with product. I like to think of comic book publishers as sharks because you have to constantly keep swimming to remain alive. When you don't have product on the shelves, then that is not revenue coming into your coffers. Marvel and DC survive because, what? They put out a comic every week. That's why when Diamond shut down shipping, DC and Marvel knew they could not allow that to happen because they rely on revenue being generated every week. Their books shipping out every week, and that is how they remain so powerful and become so big because they put out product. It's not really about the characters. The characters are important, yes, but they will put out anything for that week in order to maintain the revenue stream, because any interruption of that revenue stream could spell disaster for those comics. And it's no exception for small press publishers. You have to keep putting out content every week. In other words, in order to maintain a revenue stream. And that's how you keep afloat. The minute you stop publishing comics for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, you lose relevance. You lose, people start to move on to something else. There are other options. The thing about comics is it's a highly competitive business. You are competing with hundreds, if not thousands, of similar product, and you have to stand out. In order to stand out, you have to be repetitious. You have to keep coming out with books over and over and over and over again, until you either get an audience that can sustain the viability of that comic, or it doesn't make money and you have to move on to something else. But the important thing is to move on to something else. Realize that the comic you're selling is no longer making you or generating you income, and you have to move on to something else that will. A lot of comic book creators are very stubborn. We as comic book creators tend to want to maintain our hold on a particular IP or creation in the hopes that eventually people will discover it. Well, sometimes reality hits really hard. That maybe that, dream project you're thinking of isn't resonating with readers, isn't resonating with customers, isn't being exposed enough for you to justify its existence. And then you have to ask yourself the harsh reality: should I continue, along this path and maybe eventual bankruptcy or irrelevance, or should I change course and either reconfigure the creation into something that will sell, into something, or do something else entirely different? There's some examples, of things that didn't sell well at first, but did a pivot in order for it to sell. Is for example, like the Savage She-Hulk. When it first started off, it didn't do that well, but then they got creators and made a pivot on the character, and now she's extremely popular. And that's the same thing would go with just about any creation. Marvel, even like with the Incredible Hulk, the first series that came out was a huge newsstand disaster. Nobody bought it, but they made the Hulk, pivoted the Hulk into something different, and made it appear in other comics until finally it became popular enough people really enjoyed it. The thing is, you're in it for the long haul. So you have to be willing to constantly put out books, because comics is a periodical. They have to come out. They're not, one singular painting that you put out and just hang on a wall and let people see all the time. No, comics are entertainment. They're disposable entertainment. People read it, get rid of it, and then wait for the next issue to come out. If you're not putting out comics on a regular basis, then eventually you're going to disappear into irrelevance. Now, I'm not saying that all comics are like that. There are certain comics out there that stand the test of time and are constantly being reprinted and being read by new generations. Watchmen, Bone, Dark Knight, the Dark Knight Returns. Those are all examples of comics that still are popular even today. But they built a audience sustainable to keep those books coming out on a large basis. Even the series Bone did some 50, 60 issues, and those are issues that they could be rotated and reprinted forever. The thing about it is that, once you build up a huge library of material, then you can exploit that into all eternity. And that's one of the advantages that Anarch Press does have, is that we have a large library of material that we can draw upon, in order to maintain, some revenue stream. There's a reason why Marvel and DC, they keep reprinting their old material from 50, 60 to 30, 40. They're doing those facsimile editions. They do omnibuses. They do reprint trades. They keep those old material in print because they own it and they can exploit it. And there's always going to be a new generation of people who've never read it. So they're counting on these new next generation of readers to maintain their relevancy. Now, unfortunately, and I think that the comics are not as prevalent as they used to be, so the chances of exposure are very limited now, as opposed when it was ubiquitous on every newsstand. Every drugstore, every corner grocery store had comics to sell, to kids. But now we've lost that, and but fortunately, we do have the internet, which exposes people to a new set of comics. Now, the hope is that either digital will replace physical as far as being able to have a monetary return that is enough to justify continuing putting out new material, or just like in the newspapers of old, where readers got to read newspaper strips for free in hopes that they would buy the collection much later. This could be the same sort of model that comics can replicate today. Now, I'm not saying that this is a model that works for every publisher. Some publishers are just in single individual creators who just want to do their own one book, and that's fine. If they feel that they can sustain themselves with that one book, then that's great. More power to you. But if you're a comic book publisher, you have to keep putting out comics no matter what. In every month you have to keep putting out something new, because once you disappear from the shelves, you're going to be quickly forgotten, because there's going to be something else that's going to replace that space that you once occupied. So that's just a little bit of advice I would give from a publisher who's been around for 40 years as to what is needed for you if you're going to be a comic book publisher to maintain relevancy and sustain a revenue stream for your company in order to justify your existence. So until next time, this has been Dunn signing off.